January 30th, 1991, east of Baghdad. Two Iraqi MiG-25 Foxbats roar off the runways of Qadessia and Tammuz. They're not running away. They're breaking the wall. Waiting on the other side is Zirx-33, two American F-15C Eagles. Just months before that January dogfight, Saddam Hussein had made the gamble that doomed his nation. Iraq was drowning in debt after 8 years of war with Iran. Over $80 billion owed much of it to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Instead of rebuilding, Saddam turned his anger outward. He accused Kuwait of driving down oil prices and even stealing crude from Iraq's giant Rumaila field. But his ambitions went far beyond economics. He wanted Iraq to dominate the Persian Gulf and control Kuwait's vast reserves of oil. On August 2nd, 1990, 100,000 Iraqi troops and 300 tanks stormed across the border. Kuwait's tiny army collapsed in 2 days. Saddam declared Kuwait Iraq's 19th province. The world was stunned.
We must address these
The United
issues
Nations demanded an immediate withdrawal, but Saddam refused. Sanctions followed, then the promise of force. For Washington, London, and Riyadh, the fear was clear: if Saddam wasn't stopped in Kuwait, the oil fields of Saudi Arabia could be next. Within weeks, the largest military coalition since World War II took shape. 28 nations, nearly 1 million troops, stood shoulder to shoulder in the desert. 700,000 were American. The rest came from Britain, France, Canada, Egypt, Syria, and dozens more. First came Operation Desert Shield, a massive U.S. deployment to protect Saudi Arabia. Then, on January 17, 1991, the storm broke. Operation Desert Storm. Thousands of coalition sorties smashed Iraq's command center's radars and air defenses. Overnight, Saddam's military was blind and deaf. Iraq's air force, once the fourth largest in the world, crumbled. Pilots were forced into desperate solo flights. Many were shot down. Hundreds of aircraft never made it off the ground. Facing annihilation, Saddam gave a desperate order: fly what's left to Iran. From January 26th onward, Iraqi jets skimmed just meters above the desert floor to avoid detection. By the 29th, over 80 had crossed into Iran. By war's end, the number would climb above 115, some say nearly 140. None of them ever returned. To stop the Exodus coalition, commanders built an aerial wall, 5 round-the-clock combat air patrols of F-15s, backed by AWACS and tankers. It was a steel curtain across the Iraqi-Iranian border. Saddam's answer was Operation Samurra. The plan sent his fastest, most dangerous interceptor, the MiG-25 Foxbat, to smash a hole in the wall. The Foxbat was a relic from the 1960s, heavy, unwieldy, a poor dogfighter, but it was blindingly fast, capable of Mach 2.8, and it carried the massive R-40 missile, 80 kilometers of reach and 60 kilograms of explosive. This was Saddam's hammer, and on January 30th, he was ready to swing it. The coalition expected the MiG-29 Fulcrum to be Iraq's deadliest fighter, small, agile, equipped with helmet-sighted missiles. But in every clash, it was humiliated. Eagle pilots shot them down with ease. The Foxbat told a different story. On paper, it was outdated, huge, heavy, designed decades earlier to chase high-flying bombers. It couldn't dogfight, and its radar struggled to track low targets. But it had two things: the Fulcrum couldn't match raw speed, and the massive R-40 missile. Against all odds, MiG-25s had already proven they could fire, survive, and escape the Eagle's grasp. That record gave Saddam one last hope. If the Fulcrum was a disappointment, the Foxbat might still punch a hole in the coalition's aerial wall. And so, Operation Samurra was born. The plan was a pincer. 2 Foxbats closing from opposite directions, hitting fast at 42,000 feet. The goal: catch the Eagles off-guard fire before they could react and show the world that Iraq's Air Force still had teeth. Coalition commanders called it the Wall. 5 combat air patrols, each a pair of Eagles, stretched along the Iranian border. Overhead, an E-3 Sentry watched everything, feeding targets to the fighters below. KC-135 tankers kept the jets airborne day and night. The Eagle at the center of this wall was no ordinary fighter. The F-15 had been America's answer to the shock of Vietnam, designed in the 1970s to win air superiority without question. Twin Pratt and Whitney engines gave it the thrust to climb vertically. Its radar, the AN/APG-63, could track multiple targets, even those hiding below the horizon. And its weapons fit every fight AIM-7 Sparrows for beyond visual range shots, AIM-9 sidewinders for the merge, and a 6-barrel Vulcan cannon when things got personal. Against the MiG-25, the Eagle looked unstoppable. The Foxbat could run faster Mach 2.8 versus the Eagle's Mach 2.5 and fly slightly higher, but speed was its only trick. In a turning fight, the MiG was a brick. The Eagle was a knife. Electronics, radar, agility weapons all tilted to the American side. That's why coalition pilots called themselves cavalry in the sky. Still, war is never fought on paper. On January 30th, the Foxbat would prove that even a relic could challenge the best. That afternoon, 2 pairs of Eagles guarded the sector east of Baghdad. Xerox 33, Captain Thomas Dietz, leading with First Lieutenant Robert Heheman as his wingman, held station near the Iranian border. Xerox 31, led by Lieutenant Colonel Randy Begum, with Lieutenant Lynn Broom, had just broken off to refuel. And that was the opening Iraq had been waiting for. The wall never slept, but even walls have to breathe. Every time a patrol peeled away for fuel, a window opened, brief, narrow, but real. From Qadessia and Tammuz, 2 MiG-25s lit their afterburners, climbing to 42,000 feet. Captain Mahmoud Awad and Captain Mohammed Jassim, a samurai, were about to drive straight into that gap, hoping to smash through America's steel curtain. The Foxbat was the hammer, the Eagle, the shield. On January 30th, 1991, both would meet head-on, and the first cracks were about to show. From Qadessia and Tammuz, the 2 Foxbats clawed for altitude afterburners, spearing them to 42,000 feet. Iraqi ground controllers vectored them northeast, right toward the gap in the wall. Captain Mohammed Jassim, a samurai, was first to get a radar lock. He fired an R-40, a missile the size of a telephone pole. But the target was nothing, just a ghost, a radar anomaly east of Baghdad. The missile roared into empty sky. 500 kilometers away, an American E-3 Sentry picked up the real picture. 2 Foxbats were airborne. The call went out to Xerox 33. Captain Thomas Dietz and his wingman Lieutenant Robert Hegeman turned in to meet the threat. The intercept was head-on, 2 Eagles against 2 Foxbats. The Iraqis were higher at the edge of their radar's reach. Hegeman got the first lock. He thumbed an AIM-7 Sparrow off the rail. Nothing. The missile failed to ignite. He tried again a second Sparrow, just as the MiGs locked onto him in return. As Samurai fired back, another R-40, streaking toward Heheman. The Eagle pilot yanked south, punching out chaff and flares the missile's explosion, flashing harmlessly behind him. To the north, Dietz engaged Awad. He fired his first Sparrow, it failed. He fired again, the missile broke free but never lit. He tried a third dead on the rail. Then his warning tone screamed a Foxbat had launched. Another R-40 was inbound. Dietz broke hard, right defensive, pulling high G to shake it. Heheman pressed the fight, chasing as Samurai, and firing yet another Sparrow. It timed out in the thin air. Awad rolled in behind, covering his wingman with a threat of his own. The Americans had seen enough. Dietz called it bug out east. The 2 Eagles turned away. The Foxbat, still intact, retreated west. No jets were downed, but 1 Eagle limped home with a damaged engine from a near miss. Against all odds, Iraq's Foxbat pilots had faced the Eagle head-on and survived. The dogfight was over. Both sides had survived. To the Iraqis, that alone was a victory. Their Foxbats returned intact, something no Fulcrum pilot had managed. Within hours, Baghdad announced that 1, perhaps even 2 American Eagles had been destroyed. In Washington, the response was immediate denial. No F-15s were lost on January 30th. Official records list the engagement as a draw, 2 Foxbats escaping, 2 Eagles returning. But the truth may lie in between. Years later, pilot accounts recalled that Lieutenant Heheman's Eagle came back wounded, its left engine damaged by the near blast of an R-40. It was not a kill, but it was close enough to shake confidence. The world's most advanced air superiority fighter had fired multiple missiles and failed to bring down its prey. For Iraq, it was the last gasp of defiance. For the coalition, it was a reminder that in air combat, even the best technology can falter. And for the pilots on both sides, it was proof that survival itself can be a kind of victory. Operation Samurra didn't change the war. It was a flicker, an ambush that proved surprise was still possible. But surprise alone doesn't win campaigns. The coalition's true advantage wasn't just the F-15 or the AIM-7 or even the AWACS overhead. It was the system. Integrated command, relentless intelligence, seamless logistics. When reconnaissance command and electronic warfare work as one, the sky becomes untouchable. Iraq had brave pilots. They had aircraft that could still fight, still climb, still launch a missile, and make the world's best jet sweat. But they didn't have the network behind them. No ground control, no reliable radar picture, no coordination beyond a desperate voice on the radio. That is why just weeks later, Kuwait was liberated in only 100 hours of ground combat. That is why the 100-plus Iraqi aircraft that fled to Iran never came home. And that is why Saddam's Air Force, once the fourth largest on Earth, ceased to matter. Samura was not a turning point. It was a reminder that in modern war, victory belongs not to the single pilot who cheats death in the sky, but to the system that owns the battle space. For the men who flew that day, Dietz Hehemen Awad a Samurai, survival itself was a victory. But for history, the lesson of Samura is simple. Heroism can light the sky, but strategy decides who owns it. The clash over Baghdad wasn't the first time pilots tried to flip the script. Back in Vietnam, American aviators pulled off one of the boldest aerial deceptions in history. They called it Operation Bolo. The plan lured MiG-21s into a trap using phantoms disguised as bombers. The result one afternoon that rewrote the air war over Hanoi. Like Samura, it was about surprise. But unlike Samura, it changed the balance of the skies. That's the story we'll dive into next. If you want to explore interactive battle maps, missile evasion replays, and shot-by-shot simulations, you can find them linked below. No algorithms, no distractions, just aviation history told in full.